Problem 7.2a says show us how this would look in the balance sheet if we assumed we calculated our allowance based on 1.5% of credit sales. So we took 1.5% of that to come up with our bad debt expense for this year. So our bad debt expense, when we did this in part 1, was a debit to bad debt expense of 85.20 or 85,230, excuse me, and a credit to allowance for doubtful accounts 85,230 debit, sorry, get my lefts and my rights mixed up, and an 85,230 credit to the allowance for doubtful accounts. But if you remember right, I might have mentioned that we had a debit balance in the account, 16,580. So when we did that, we put in our 85,230, balance the T account, take the small number from the big number, write the answer under the big number. We come up with 68,650. You had to do this piece first. You had to see that piece. There's no way in hell you can look at the problem and not figure it out. So that's where we come up with the 68,650. Now we can show it this way, an allowance for doubtful accounts separately, or we can show it this way, and this is often referred to as accounts receivable at net, or NRV, net realizable value, where we include the allowance and simply list the bad debt expense. Either one is fine. I need you to know this because you're managers. You're going to have to evaluate these things. You're going to have to understand what goes on behind the scene. You're going to have to see what went into making the sausage, so to speak. You're going to hire fools like me to actually do this, but you need to understand what's behind it. So that's part 2. Now, part 3 says, okay, let's do the same thing again, but now let's assume that what we're doing, and then I got all my notes here mixed up, sorry. What we're going to be doing here in part 3 is we're going to be assuming that this company bases its bad debt and shows its bad debt as a part of receivables. So they say 5% of their accounts receivable is uncollectible. Very similar, we did the same thing. And what we did is we took their accounts receivable, 5% of that is going to be uncollectible. So 5% of that works out to be 85,230. That's 5% of accounts receivable. We had a debit balance, so we have to subtract that. So when we subtract the debit balance from the 85,230, we come up with 63,505, and we record it the same way. 63,505, 1,206,595, or we can just show it as net and keep the 63,505 separate and show the whole amount. They're really very similar. You can do either one. They're both acceptable. You just need to be able to understand and read behind the numbers.